Okay, hello everyone. My name is Clifford, and today I'm going to be analyzing a game that was played in Mavens Open that happened the last week. I think this happened on March 28th, 2026, and this is a game between candidate master Gong Thon Gong versus Grandmaster Plat Vojtech, and this is a very exciting game. Gong Thon Gong is one of the strongest players in East Africa, and Grandmaster Plat Vojtech is a Grandmaster from Serbia. He traveled all the way because of a very large prize pool in Mavens Open. So technically, you can argue that he came for the number one prize. uh, but something brief about both players is that they're both very tactical players, and they both play really quickly. Like even in classical chess, where most players, they spend, I don't know, on average 10 minutes per move or something, depending on the position. Of course, these guys they're playing, 1 minute per move. And I remember spectating this game and I couldn't even like move because it's like every 2 minutes they're making a move. You consider why they made that move and all that. So this was a very exciting game to follow, and it had one of the most exciting attacking patterns I've seen in a very long time, like for a game that has happened in Kenya. So let's begin. So Gong Thon starts with e4. The Grandmaster plays e5, and he plays the Filido, which is an opening that he has been playing this whole tournament. I think the difference is that maybe he starts with d6 in most other games, but I think it's just kind of a transposition or something of the sort. But anyway, we go into the Filido. I don't know if this is called the exchange Filido or something, but I assume it is. Gong Thon develops his queen, which allows Plat to develop his knight with tempo, but Gong Thon is able to pin the knight and trade it off. This is because in this position the queen is not hanging because it's pinned to the king, and by playing bishop to d7 we're able to break the pin, so now the queen is threatened. And after Gong Thon trades, you can see right now that the Grandmaster is the one who has a bishop pair. However, Gong Thon's bishop is already ready to develop. He's ready to castle if he wants to castle short, and after knight to c3 is just going to have completed development in this case. So, and for Grandmaster Plat, he probably has to develop his bishop here and his knight here and then castle, which kind of looks awkward if you ask me, because his bishop is just going to be very uncomfortable. So there's some trade-offs here. The bishop pair for a lead in development. So Gong Thon plays bishop to g5, attacking Grandmaster Plat's queen. Moving the queen is not really such a good idea because in this case, you're not really threatening to castle or all that, and you want to do that if you're going to make some major inroads or some kind of development. Putting the bishop here is potentially also not such a good idea because after trading, maybe developing the knight here, the player with the higher rating kind of wants to keep pieces on the board so that they have good attacking chances. So in this case, the Grandmaster results in f6, which is it's a move that you really actually have to consider before playing it, because you are effectively weakening the light squares in front of your king, maybe for the rest of the game. But also in contrast, this pawn acts like a spike. So the knight really cannot develop here, the knight cannot develop here because of the f6 pawn. And also the dark squared bishop is being kicked, and potentially it could support a move like g5 if you choose that way and at the right time. So f6 is a good move in this case, and so Gong takes his bishop back because he doesn't want it to hang, and the Grandmaster plays his maneuver of developing the knight by going to e7 and eventually going to f6, which maybe is kind of making me think that maybe Gong Thon Gong should have just played bishop to e3, because now after he plays knight to e7 and he plays knight to g7, knight to g6. This doesn't come with tempo attacking the bishop, but yeah, maybe it's an improvement for another time. So Gong Thon plays bishop to f4. The grandmaster starts his maneuver, and Gong Thon completes its development. As you can see, even like for really strong players, he still follow chance principles. And the grandmaster plays knight to g6, and now he's attacking the bishop. And the bishop draws back to e3, and potentially e3 is better than g3 because there's a blockade on this side. So in this case, your bishop kind of has more range and this it's more open, so it's more active on e3. So the grandmaster plays bishop to e7 and Gong Thon castles long and the grandmaster castles short. So this immediately this is opposite side castling, and there are ways you can play opposite side castling. But number one thing that you can talk about is that this is a kind of imbalance in chess, because of course one king is on the other side of the board and the other is on the other side of the board. So one of the ways you can play with this is that you can choose to go for a king side attack, and you can try to checkmate your opponent as quickly as possible before they checkmate you. That is one of the principles of opposite side castling. But at such a high level, these guys are so good at understanding the position that sometimes if you try and rush an attack with sacrifices and all that, you find that you run out of fuel. So you have to consider everything very carefully. So let's see how they approach this situation in this case. So Gong Thon gives his check to the king, and the king is forced to h8. And this is something that you have to notice. The king doesn't have any squares right now, meaning that potentially any check could be fatal. An example I could give is like knight here. This is just an example. This is not going to happen, of course, but I think already in this position this could be potentially a tactic like this. And let's say after this check and knight comes here, maybe yeah, taking with the knight is much better, but maybe you're surviving this, but you're actually not surviving this. This is just checkmate. So this is very bad for you. So that's something to watch out for. But the thing is that white's pawn is really not going to disappear from the board. It's just something to take note of. So sorry. In this case, Gong Thon decides to play knight to d4, which is attacking the bishop on c6, and he's threatening to double pawns and also to win this pawn. So you could argue that maybe you want him to open up this file, but you see the idea is if you actually let him take and put your rook here, a move like d6 could just cancel out your attack. And you remember that the grandmaster's bishop is like, it's currently a pawn, so you don't really have the firepower to actually go for sacrifices like that just yet. So the grandmaster chooses knight to e5, which is attacking Gong Thon's bishop and reinforcing the knight here just in case the knight takes. And of course this is something that you have to calculate. I don't know if Gong Thon chooses to play knight takes, winning the queen here, you pick the queen. The things you have to consider, like if this knight can get out, the amount of material that has been won, this is threatening the rook and all that. So this is a calculation that you actually have to make. But I'm sure they did that. Well, Gong Thon chooses to bring his queen back, and the queen goes back all the way to e2 because that's a safe square, and also because here it's controlling g4, meaning that these knight forward moves are being monitored by the queen. So the grandmaster chooses to go bishop to d7, and he's controlling this square on g4. And by controlling this, it means that knight to g4 could actually be an idea. I think bishop to g4 is not such a good idea because after f3, what have you done? So maybe knight here, threatening to trade off this dark square bishop, which could potentially be a very good piece for white. So Gong Thon prevents that by playing h3, and potentially now he's preparing an idea like f4. taking up space and kicking the knight backwards. And you can go wrong if you decide to go for something like g6, because now you're kind of giving the h pawn a target. So the grandmaster plays rook to e8, which is just another very simple opening principle. You want your rook on open files or half open files in this case, and also the rook is kind of x-raying the queen, albeit I think that's actually an English term, albeit or something, uh, that there are many pieces in between the rook and the queen. Uh, so Gong Thon, that's a pawn storm with g4. Yeah, g4 it's okay, though I thought f4 was better, but I guess they're both just transposing to it, so I'm not really sure I understand why he started with g4, but it's a good move. So the grandmaster decides to improve his poor bishop here, so kind of also reducing the fog on the e file, and also reinforcing defense on his king. So after Gong plays, sorry, I don't know, I keep doing that. After Gong plays f4, the knight is kicked back, and he's offering trades for pieces here. So by playing f4, you can see that Gong Thon is almost ready for a break like this in the center. Maybe not now, because maybe he needs a few more moments to set it up and all that. But you see, his attack has started. While if you look at the grandmaster, he hasn't really started an attack on the queen side. So potentially the GM is probably going to be forced to sit back and defend if he does not find like a way to deal with this pressure. So actually in this case, because I've looked at this game a bit before, if you look at all those ideas and you put them in the back of your mind, you can kind of understand that h4 is actually an inaccuracy, because black doesn't really have a lot of good ideas at this point, especially after playing knight to c6. The attack is paused a lot because they cannot move their c4, c5 pawn, c7 pawn to c5, starting an attack with something like this. So in this case, if you think about it, you kind of want to avoid the trade as white. So actually the best move from what I saw was knight to f3, and knight to f3 also does what? It supports g5 break, pawn break of course, and you have to time it really well, because again this is x-ray also, potential for tactics, and maybe there's a way of putting pressure here. So in my opinion, after looking at this game before and right now, I'm gonna say that knight to f3 is a really strong move, and maybe a potential miss in human terms, but you cannot really argue with h4. He's just continuing with the attack, and the grandmaster is able to trade one minor piece off that could have been used in the attack, and by doing so, after knight takes and bishop takes, there is this move c5, and by playing c5 now, after Gong Thon pushes his bishop back, I'm really wondering who's texting me at 11:50, but okay. My bishop goes back, and then sorry, his bishop goes back. Sorry for the interlude, but after the bishop goes back, the grandmaster is able to play b5, and now he's already starting his attack just so quickly. So right now, initially it was just Gong Thon who had like all these pawns pushed, but just like that, by being able to trade on d5 and d4, the grandmaster is also able to start his attack. And now you have to watch out for attacks and ideas like that. Number one now is a move like b5 is going to dislodge the knight. Potentially you can say that the knight can't go here because of the bishop. You don't really want to go back. This is way too passive. So potentially you can just say that knight to d5 is a very good square for the knight, but those are ideas you just need to watch out for. So Gong Thon plays f5, which I guess is restricting the bishop even more, but that actually creates a backwards pawn in e4. And now you can have ideas of like piling pressure on this pawn, and maybe, I don't know, trying to win it. That could be one of the plans. But of course, like, white is not going to sit here and watch you do that. And the Grandmaster plays Queen to E7, and maybe for the first time I'm actually really curious about, you know, an idea like this. Okay, of course, I'm saying it doesn't work because you don't really have this fork at the end of the line because the rook has moved. But yeah, that's maybe an idea you can think of. But after playing queen here, there is going to be two attackers on this pawn, and there are two defenders. However, if you play a random move like here, I'm going to attack your knight, and when the knight moves away, I am going to capture here, and I'm going to have a better position, and I'm going to be up a pawn. So let's not do that, and let's defend, reinforce with rook to e8. So this actually makes it a much better position for white, rather than blundering the e4 pawn. Oh my god, I don't know how Gotham does this. So here, Gong plays king to b1, and I'm guessing that's to counter the pressure that was on the a5, which again, you know, maybe it's a bit slow, because I would argue that if you ever attack here, yes, the defender of this is being pushed away, but you're actually blocking um, the queen. But maybe there are potential tactics, with this X-ray. I'm not saying it works right now, but you kind of get my point. But I still think, yeah, king b1 is still an okay move. And like I said, there's just going to be pressure being mounted on this square. But there's really not much to be worried about, because you always have knight to d5, which counters this pressure that is being formed. Gong Thon plays queen to d3, allowing the rook to be the primary defender to this guy. And the Grandmaster plays rook to b8, which rook to b8 is a very it's set up like one of the most brilliant tactical ideas that I've seen in a very long time. Now, I don't have enough time to kind of set a new board and all that. Maybe, let me see if I can do it as quickly as possible. With strain analysis, there is a concept that I just want to share, even if it's just maybe like for 30 seconds. So, in the Queen's Gambit and the Caro-Kann defense, let's say, I don't know if I can really set up this well, but I will do my best. Like in the Slav defense, or in the Slav defense, in the semi-Slav, actually, I think it's the best example in this case. I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go here, and then I'm gonna go here. My bad, that was oh yeah, actually c6. Bishop here, say bishop here. Let's say you play here, let's say you play here, let's say you play, let's say you take, I take, you play queen c2, you castle, you play bishop d3 ready to castle, maybe you play rook to e8, etc, you castle. Yes, in a position like this, you can see something. You can see that in this side, if you divide the board, this is not technically dividing it into two, but I just want you to look at the A, B, and C file. Something that you notice here is that white has 2 pawns and black has 3 pawns. So an idea that you can come up with is a way to trade off these 2 pawns, and when you subtract 3 minus 2, you're left with 1 pawn. And that is something we call the minority attack. Now I'm going to say this is one of the simplest ways I win my games in chess, because the number of times people dismiss the ideas of the minority attack is ridiculous. Because sometimes you see they are really focused on the ideas, and by the time the minority attack breaks through, you find that you already created your attack. So what is the point of showing you this? The point of showing you this is that sometimes people are inclined to play a move like rook to c1, which I'm guessing even the agent recommends. But for the minority attack, maybe you even want just to play b4. Sorry, rook to b1. And what is the idea behind rook to b1? is to push b4. Just start your minority attack. And sometimes people stop this idea by playing a6. And what do? You can play something like a4, and if they continue ignoring you, I don't know if it's a tactic that has a reason somewhere, you can actually go for a move like b5 now. And the idea is that if you take and I take and I take, in this case you're going to have like a very weak pawn in this case here. And I know this has not been done to such a very good way of explaining, but this is technically the essence of a minority attack, and it weakens the pawns. That it's technically using 2 pawns to weaken 3 pawns by making 1 pawn be left that you can actually use to target later on. And you can see very quickly it's just going to be very, very hard to defend this pawn. Maybe there's even bishop here attacking this rook and winning the pawn straight, but you can see the kind of problems that arise. So in this case, the Grandmaster plays rook to b8, and I think that's kind of the idea. I think this is something that he is setting up. So after rook to b8, Gong Thon he's also putting pressure on the backwards pawn for black, which in this case is b6, and the Grandmaster plays pawn to c4. You will forgive me for that. It's a bit tiring to speak this slow. But after the Grandmaster plays bishop to c4, there's pressure on this pawn. There are 2 attackers, and potentially the knight can be kicked out, so removing the defender of this pawn. So in this case, I think that queen to d5 is forced. I don't think it's a good idea to continue staying in this pin. Queen to d6 is played. The Grandmaster plays b5, and as you can see, b5, after b5, Gong Thon plays knight d5, which is something that I think I've discussed before. You don't really want your knight to go here, it's a bit too passive, and here the knight is hanging, so you just play knight to d5, and if you trade, I think everything is okay for you. But here the Grandmaster uncocks his move b3, which if you're able to calculate correctly, it's potentially even, it's in this case you're not even losing a pawn, but the thing is it's just creating problems, because whether you like it or not, even if you take once and you take a second time and you decide to push this pawn, like for example, if you take here and push here, you're just going to have this very annoying pawn that is just going to create checkmate threats all over the place, and you have to start watching for ideas like this all the time. So this b3 move is very good, because it's also a gambit in itself, because if you notice, the c4 pawn is hanging, and there's no point in me explaining it because it is something that we're going to see here. So after Gong Thon takes this pawn here, right, of course you can say that if he takes here and it takes here, I think he's doing very well, but the Grandmaster trades here on d5, and this is one of the things that shows the difference in levels. I am pretty sure that most players, let's say rated below 2000 like me, could not see this coming, because at this point I remember I was looking at it with the engine, and I didn't understand why at this point black was being given a minus 0.1, because it felt to me like white's attack is just coming, and after trading here, my king comes out, and I go back, maybe I push this, there's not enough for an attack for white. But at this point, Gong Thon has a very limited number of moves, and the idea is just visualizing something that I want you to try and visualize, is that if he takes with the queen, whatever piece he takes with, if he ever takes here, you actually have to draw out your king. And you might say, what's a big deal? And the big deal is coming out next, because after you give this check, the king is either forced here, which I'll come back to, or the king is forced to run in the center. And this doesn't look really good, yes? So Gong Thon has only one move, and I think he missed it, because in this case, you have to be able to visualize that your king is actually being drawn out. And maybe if rook here, your king is totally fine. There's not much of a threat. Maybe there is a threat somewhere, but it's not so good. So in this case, I think Gong Thon's only move was either to take with the pawn, which is not good because this pawn is very, very weak. Even after rook takes, I don't know if this is going to be an idea like this. I'm just, I'm just trying to emphasize that this pawn is weak. So it's something you have to watch out for. But I think the best move was just, rook takes, and then if he ever takes, you can just take, or even just sit here, and you're okay. But in this case, Gong Thon, in this classical blitz match where everyone is just playing every move quickly, but the Grandmaster took on c2 quickly. Gong Thon also takes quickly, and after he's given this check, he blitzes out because you can see the time he spent. This is less than 10 seconds maybe, and he plays king to b1, and he's hit with a cold shower when the queen moves all the way to c3. And why is this such a dangerous move? Number one, you cannot take the queen because it's pinned with the rook here, and the queen and the rook are combining for a checkmate attack that you have to defend, and also the bishop is hanging on g3. So at this point, after Gong Thon defends the checkmate attack, the Grandmaster wins a pawn, and at this point it's just a matter of conversion. And after a couple of moves, the Grandmaster is able to find a way to trade everything, and this kind of looks scary and all, but the Grandmaster finds a way to eventually trade off. Yeah, he eventually finds a way to trade off everything. So I'm guessing here after rook takes, actually there's no attack with the king. Let me see. So after check, is there just checkmate somewhere? Yeah, I'm just pretty sure there has to be like checkmate somewhere because if you ever go here, you don't really have enough time to get out of this. So yeah, this is one of the most exciting games from the recently concluded Mavens Open. Another good game that I actually saw was from the ladies section. There were two